Welcome to the channel where powerful stories come to life. Get ready for truth, emotion, and transformation, one story at a time. We live in an era where many only see value when it comes wrapped in a fancy label, a prestigious last name, or a high follower count. The rest? They ignore, avoid, judge in silence. But what if I told you that, right in the middle of your town square, there might be someone with more power than you could ever imagine? And what if that elderly woman you didn't look in the eyes was the one destined to change lives, maybe even yours? Some people believe humility equals weakness, that those who stay silent are lost, that someone in simple clothes has nothing to offer. But the world loves to humble the arrogant. And when a young black woman, brave, empathetic, and invisible to the system, reached out to a woman everyone else dismissed, she had no idea she was triggering the biggest turning point of her life. This isn't just another story, it's a warning, a call, a provocation, because maybe you too are ignoring the greatness of someone right next to you, or perhaps the dormant greatness within yourself. She walked slowly, as if searching for something she'd forgotten years ago. Her worn clothes hid a story no one there cared to hear. The city center buzzed with hurried footsteps, busy glances, and silent judgments. Some changed their path, others chuckled quietly. And in that sea of haste, no one stopped to wonder why a lonely black woman stood still in the crowd. It's curious how we've learned to look without truly seeing, to glance without listening. There she was, a woman with a weary expression, but no one cared to ask if she needed help. You know those people you see on the bus, eyes lost in thought? How many stories do we ignore each day just because we think we've already seen enough? That's how we miss out on the encounters that could change everything, all because of prejudice disguised as hurry. She asked for nothing. No change, no favors, just walked, stumbling over sidewalks and assumptions. But look around any public square and you'll see these stories repeat. People erased in broad daylight, treated as if they're invisible. And when an entire society pretends not to see, someone has to be brave enough to go against the current. While everyone else looked away, a young woman stopped, not out of curiosity, but empathy. A nursing student used to caring for silent pain, she noticed something different in that lost gaze. It was as if the woman were silently screaming, begging to be truly seen. And without hesitation, the young woman held her hand. A simple gesture. But in a world where most people prefer to judge rather than reach out, this gesture sparked a revolution. The elderly woman took a deep breath, and for the first time in hours, or maybe days, she smiled. A shy smile, as if surprised to still be seen as human. "I thought people like me had become invisible," she said. That whispered phrase carried centuries of exclusion. And right there, in that intergenerational connection and shared pain, a story began to write itself, unnoticed by the rest. Have you ever considered the power of an outstretched hand? Sometimes what changes the world isn't a grand act. It's stopping to ask if someone's okay, like that young woman did. At work, on the bus, even at home, a gesture like that can light a spark where there was only shadow. Because behind every tired face, there might be a story ready to bloom, if only someone decides to listen. Just as the connection was forming, it was broken. Two security guards rushed in as if trying to put out a fire, but all that was there was humanity. Without asking, without listening, they tried to remove the woman as if she were an eyesore. The young woman, scared but firm, didn't let go of her hand. Because real empathy doesn't back down to please an audience. The excuse came quickly. She's disturbing the environment. Funny how prejudice likes to disguise itself as protocol, right? The elderly woman wasn't shouting, wasn't begging. She was simply being what many can't tolerate, someone who makes them uncomfortable just by existing. And if you think this only happens in malls, think again. People are being excluded from conversations, projects, and spaces every day, just for not fitting the mold. But that's when the young woman proved that character doesn't ask for permission. She looked the guards in the eye and demanded respect, not with screams, but with conviction. Because when you understand the value of stories, you also learn to protect those who carry scars. And sometimes what the world needs most is someone to say, "She's not alone." But that response would soon shock even those who thought they had everything under control. Amid the chaos, the woman calmly said, "I need to make a call." She didn't ask. She stated. She pulled a small phone from her worn purse and dialed with the certainty of someone who knows she'll be heard. The young woman was still holding her hand when, minutes later, the hum of luxury engines drowned out the noise. Black cars with tinted windows pulled up in front of the mall, and all heads turned, doors opened, and out stepped drivers, assistants, and executives in a rush. Dr. Alankar, we're so sorry for the delay, they said, stumbling over apologies. The security guards who moments earlier tried to kick her out now fumbled with their shame. The young woman watched in disbelief, her heart racing. It felt like watching one of those stories you only see in movies, except now she was in it. Have you ever thought about what happens when truth becomes a surprise? The world loves to judge by appearances but panics when faced with the unexpected. That moment, right on the sidewalk, turned into a public lesson in arrogance and humility, because some people only show respect when they see money, imported cars, and famous surnames. But the most powerful stories are told long before any reveal, and this one was just beginning. Dr. Alankar, that was the name echoing among those who had laughed moments ago. The elderly woman, dismissed in the square, was one of the top investors in affordable housing in the country. A billionaire, visionary, and founder of one of Latin America's most respected humanitarian funds. The most ironic part? She had been walking there precisely to test society's social gaze. She didn't want recognition. She wanted truth. And she found prejudice. Over the years, Dona Alankar built more than buildings. She built dignity. She created programs that lifted thousands out of poverty, funded community colleges, and renovated entire hospitals, all while staying out of the spotlight. But that day, on that downtown sidewalk, what hurt most wasn't the disregard. It was realizing that after doing so much, all it took was looking poor to be treated like a problem. And how many stories like this are repeating silently every day? It's easy to applaud philanthropy when it comes with a fancy speech and expensive suit. Harder to recognize greatness when it wears sandals and speaks gently. What most didn't know was that she had turned down primetime interviews just to keep listening to people in health clinic lines. Because she knew the value of a story isn't in the setting, it's in the impact. And in that moment, those who once ignored her now fought for a chance to apologize. In the middle of the confusion, as people tried to understand who she really was, the young woman still held her hand, with the same simplicity and respect as before. That's when Dona Alankar, with a calm yet firm gaze, said something that would change her life forever. You saw me when no one else did. Now it's my turn to see you. In that sentence was something far greater than gratitude. It was the beginning of a new story. Days later, the young woman was invited to a formal dinner at a 5-star hotel. She arrived shyly, unsure where to place her hands, but was welcomed as someone important, and she was. During the event, Dona Alankar announced that she would sponsor a full scholarship for her to finish college, and invited her to join the board of her new social project. A rare opportunity, but a deserved one. Because those who plant empathy reap the future. You know what this teaches us? That the most unexpected rewards often come from the simplest gestures. While many seek networking in VIP lounges, that young woman built her bridge with a handshake. And that's how many stories turn into life-changing pages. The question that remains is, what have you been doing when no one's watching? Because it's in that silence that the most powerful invitations are born. The impact was immediate. The scene of the elderly woman being removed, then greeted by a luxury entourage, went viral. The mall tried to issue a public apology, but the damage was done. Boycott hashtags spread like wildfire, and the company felt the sting of institutional prejudice in its bottom line. People who had never cared about these stories before were now reflecting and being held accountable for it. But Dona Alankar, with the wisdom of someone who had seen the world from the inside out, chose a different path. Instead of demanding punishment, she created a re-education program for the security guards. I don't want revenge. I want transformation, she said. Those who had once acted out of ignorance now attended classes on empathy, justice, and human rights. Because it's not enough to point out the mistake. It's necessary to offer a real chance for change. And here's a golden truth. How many times do we choose to exclude rather than teach? To cancel rather than rebuild? If every mistake were treated as a lesson, how many stories could be redefined? What Dona Alankar did was flip the system's switch, showing that true power isn't in shouting but in guiding, and that quiet change would still echo in unexpected ways. At the place where it all began, something had shifted. The park bench, once ignored, now bore a golden plaque. Here began a new story. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a permanent reminder. People stopped to take pictures, to reflect, and most importantly, to extend a hand to whoever was nearby. That simple gesture, silently repeated by many, became a symbol of a new way of seeing the world. Social movements began to emerge. Schools created projects inspired by the episode. Children wrote letters to lonely elders. Young people organized discussion circles in public squares. The young woman's gesture multiplied. And when a story touches the collective heart, it stops being an isolated case. It becomes a seed. What was once contempt became a symbol, and what was invisible began to be sought after by those who once refused to see. More than going viral, that moment humanized. And the question that echoed was simple yet profound. How many hands have you been ignoring out there? Because sometimes the change the world needs is sitting on the nearest park bench, just waiting for a different gaze. And that chain of empathy was about to find a powerful voice in the next chapters of this story. The young woman, once invisible to the world's eyes, now stood on stages that once seemed unreachable. Not because she sought the spotlight, but because her story, simple, real, full of truth, had become the collective cry of so many others who had been silenced by prejudice, neglect, and social invisibility. It all started with a simple act, a hand extended to a woman many had deemed irrelevant. But that gesture changed not only one destiny, it altered the path of an entire generation. The young woman's name spread through conversations, social media, and classrooms. And suddenly what had seemed like just another day in an ordinary square became the starting point of a movement. She began visiting public schools, speaking to teenagers who, like her, had learned early on that the world isn't always kind to those with dark skin, humble origins, and big dreams. Her stories didn't come from books. They came from her skin, her scars, from the silences she had learned to break. Over time, invitations poured in to universities, seminars, international forums, and with every speech she brought not only her journey, but also the stories of many others that life had tried to erase. She spoke of structural racism, but also of possibility, of pain, but also of resilience, of exclusion, but most of all, of belonging. Her words were seeds planted in attentive ears, seeds that over time would blossom into concrete actions. Donna Alankar, the woman once rejected by hurried glances and closed hearts, now became a constant presence in the audience. She never asked to be on stage. She said her time had already been lived, and now it was time to listen. Always seated in the front row, her eyes welled with tears and her heart full of hope. "She is the future," she would repeat with conviction. And she was right. The young woman represented the most powerful force in a society learning to rewrite its wounds into legacy. With support from organizations, activists, and volunteers, she began building support networks for young people from marginalized communities. She launched training projects, scholarship programs, empowerment and art workshops. She visited favelas, juvenile detention centers, shelters, villages, and schools forgotten by the system. In every place, she heard new stories of abandonment, of struggle, of resilience, and in each one, she saw a piece of herself. She said that listening was the first step toward healing, and she healed, without rush, through presence. Black youth began to see her as a role model, not just because she had made it, but because she showed that success isn't forgetting where you came from, it's transforming the place you came from. She always returned to the same square where it all started. She sat on the same bench, now cleaned and surrounded by flowers, thanks to local residents who had learned the story and wanted to preserve that symbol. And there, head bowed and ears open, she kept on listening. Children brought drawings, single mothers shared their struggles, elders brought memories no one else cared to hear. She said that every time someone is truly seen, a silent revolution begins. And she was right, because that revolution, born from a gesture of empathy, went on to transform public policies, influence school curricula, and inspire film scripts and TV programs. Newspapers wrote about her. Publishers wanted her book. Filmmakers wanted to tell her journey. But she always said, "This story isn't mine, it's ours." And she insisted on sharing credit with everyone who believed in the power of true listening. Once, while being honored at an international event, someone asked her the secret to having such impact in so little time. She took a deep breath, looked at the audience, and answered, "I just held a hand the whole world had ignored. And that hand led me into myself." When we recognize another's pain as a mirror of our own, everything changes. And she was given a standing ovation, not for vanity, but for truth. The park bench became a tourist landmark. School groups visited to hear the story. Guided tours narrated the journey of the young woman and Dona Alankar as a symbol of social change through empathy. Social media filled with hashtags, videos, testimonials. People from all over the world began replicating the gesture. Cities launched active listening campaigns. Hospitals began training professionals with social sensitivity modules. Companies created inclusion programs inspired by her message. It's not about helping, it's about recognizing. And even with all the attention, she remained grounded. Still lived in the same simple house, still visited the local market, still walked without bodyguards, without vanity. She said the greatest reward was seeing someone who once doubted themselves begin to dream again. That the strongest stories are the ones we almost overlook, and that her mission was to hold those stories by the hand, with care, with truth, with love. The revolution that began with a gesture crossed borders. International organizations invited her to train young leaders. In different countries, speaking different languages, her message was understood by the heart. Children in Africa, teenagers in Asia, Latin communities in the United States, all saw themselves in that journey. Because empathy has no translation, it has intention. Dona Alankar, her health now more fragile, still smiled every time the young woman returned from the road. She said it was like watching a flower that refuses to wither, even after the storm. And during one of their reunions, holding hands on the same bench as always, the old woman said, "If I'm ever gone, don't cry, because my story already lives in you." The young woman cried, but then smiled, because she knew it was true. Today that story lives on, in textbooks, in award-winning documentaries, in social projects, in community discussions, in public policies, in touched hearts, because when someone is truly seen, they become a bridge, and bridges unite worlds that were once separated by walls of prejudice. And the most powerful truth of all is knowing that there are still millions of hands out there, waiting for nothing more than a different look, a simple gesture, a real listening ear, because sometimes all someone needs is to hear, "You matter." And when that happens, oh my friend, when that happens, a story is born. One of those that can't fit in a book but can change the world. The park bench, once just a forgotten detail in the urban landscape, became an altar. That space made of worn wood and rusted iron, where thousands had hurried past without ever noticing it, became the stage for one of the most powerful stories of recent times. It wasn't fiction. It was raw reality. An improbable meeting, an extended hand, a silent gesture that screamed louder than any speech. The young woman, walking firmly with eyes wide open, saw what no one else did, an old woman sitting there, alone, ignored by all, almost mistaken for the bench itself. Dona Alankar carried far more than the weight of her years on her shoulders. She bore marks that time doesn't erase, wounds society insists on ignoring. Simple clothes, lowered gaze, hunched posture. It wasn't sadness, it was the exhaustion of being invisible. And in that moment, surrounded by collective indifference, it was the young woman's gesture that shattered the silence. She didn't just see her, she approached, reached out her hand, and in that moment, a revolution began. What seemed like a casual act of kindness quickly made headlines. But it wasn't about fame, it was about the domino effect. Schools began discussing the incident. Radios and newspapers opened space for conversations about empathy. The story of the young woman and Dona Alankar crossed borders, becoming the subject of international debates. The park bench, now marked by a symbolic plaque, started receiving visitors, flowers, silent tributes. And from all of this, a chain of transformation was born, one that no one expected, but everyone began to hope for. Publishers fought over the rights to turn that experience into a book. Film directors wanted to take the story to the screen. The documentary that followed was translated into over 20 languages. But the most surprising thing? In every version, the essence remained. This wasn't charity. It was recognition. It wasn't about helping a poor, helpless woman. It was about honoring a life, a path, a presence that deserved respect. The speaking engagements multiplied. The young woman began receiving invitations from schools, universities, companies, NGOs. But she always made a point to share the spotlight with Dona Alankar. "She is the real protagonist," she always said. And Dona Alankar, with her steady voice and deep gaze, captivated audiences. She shared her story, not as a complaint, but as someone planting seeds. She spoke of her losses, yes, but also of her faith, her struggles, her resilience. And every time she spoke, more people saw themselves in her. Society began to ask hard questions. How many Dona Alankars are out there? How many stories have we missed because we were too busy judging appearances? How many times have we ignored outstretched hands? Eyes asking to be seen, smiles hoping for kindness. That encounter in the square uncovered an uncomfortable truth. Social blindness is more common than we'd like to admit. And deep down, we all carry some guilt for looking away at some point. But the story didn't end there. It grew. It unfolded. City governments began investing in community listening projects. Teachers rethought their educational approaches. Children were encouraged to interview elders from their neighborhoods, turning memories into illustrated books. Festivals emerged to share real stories told by everyday people, and in each of them a spark was lit, the spark of valuing lived experience. The most remarkable part? Neither the young woman nor Dona Alankar sought recognition. There was no script, no ambition. Everything started from one simple choice: to see the other. And that choice, so small at first glance, changed everything. Because when someone decides to see with their heart, the world shifts. Doors open. Awareness awakens. Entire structures begin to crumble. And new foundations are laid. More humane, more just, more real. In school hallways, Dona Alankar's name began to appear alongside great thinkers. Not out of vanity, but out of justice. Because her story carried what many books forget: truth. And truth is what touches the most. In every classroom where her journey was shared, a student paused to reflect. A teacher reconsidered their methods. A young person chose to listen to their grandparents more attentively. And so, brick by brick, a new culture began to rise. Dona Alankar said her favorite part was when people came to thank her. But she would smile and reply, "There's no need to thank me. Just don't forget to do the same for someone else." That advice spread like seeds on the wind. Across Brazil and the world, park benches began appearing with bronze plaques, inviting passers-by to listen to those who sit there, not as charity, but as a recognition that each person carries a living library within them. Today, the story is still alive, not just in books, videos, or news features. It lives in the gestures that multiply, in the hands that reach out, in the eyes that finally meet. It lives in those who decide to stop for a moment and ask, "Are you okay?" Because the real impact is this: to spark movement, to create change, to turn the ordinary into something extraordinary, not because it's rare, but because it's true. And maybe, in the end, what separates an ordinary life from an inspiring one isn't destiny or accomplishments, but the willingness to see beyond the surface, to recognize the greatness that lives in silence, in simplicity, in the pain behind a smile. To understand once and for all that the stories that truly change the world are not told by distant heroes, but by real people, in real places, living gestures that truly touch. If this story moved you, don't keep it just as a memory. Use it as a lens, as a compass, as a starting point, because the world is still full of Donas Alankars waiting to be seen, and maybe, just maybe, you will be the next outstretched hand. And if you are, remember, you won't just be saving a destiny. You'll be writing a new story, one the whole world needs to hear. How many hands have you already let pass by? How many glances crossed your path and were ignored simply because you had already decided who deserved your attention and who didn't even deserve a good afternoon? Life happens in the details, but we insist on only seeing the headlines. And while we chase after the grand and spectacular, we keep stumbling over the most powerful stories, the ones wrapped in simplicity. It's easy to be impressed by what shines, what's well-dressed, what carries titles. But the real challenge is training your eyes to see value in what doesn't scream for attention. Because so often, what seems small, invisible, or out of place carries astonishing power. And the question remains, how many stories have you lost because of your own filters? Some people cross our paths as a test, as a mirror, as a seed, but we only realize that later, after life teaches us, after time passes, after regret settles in. And that's where the real challenge lies. Learning to see before it's too late, before that outstretched hand, that timid gesture, that silent presence disappears without a trace. Because make no mistake, the world is full of outstretched hands waiting for nothing more than acknowledgement. A smile, a "how are you?" A simple Thank you. Sometimes what looks like a cry for help is actually an offer of change, a hidden door, an invitation to step out of your bubble and dive into a new way of seeing life. And if you don't pay attention, you miss the chance to live. Stories that change everything. How many times have we stumbled over our own arrogance, thought we knew too much, saw too little, felt almost nothing? Prejudice is sneaky. It disguises itself as common sense, as opinion, as experience. But deep down, it's just fear. Fear of going off script, of questioning our certainties, of realizing we don't know as much as we thought. And the cruelest part? In this game, you're the one who loses. You lose stories, connections, lessons. You lose your humanity. So now I invite you to pause. A real pause. The kind that demands more than silence. It demands presence. Think about the last time you truly listened to someone. Not to reply, not to give advice, just to listen. Can you remember? We live surrounded by voices, yet we listen less and less. And that's why so many incredible stories get lost in the noise of the world. Imagine if you had paid attention to that old man on the bench, or to the cashier smiling despite tired eyes. What if that homeless man you avoided knew more about life than a stack of books? How many treasures do we miss out on just because they don't look like what we expected? Life is made of encounters. Some change our day. Others change who we are. And the most special ones change everything. But for that to happen, we need to be willing. Willing to see without filters, to feel without fear, to touch without judgment. Willing to recognize that behind every face is a history, a journey, a story. And what if I told you that the next big step in your life isn't in an elaborate plan, but in a simple act, an outstretched hand, a word spoken at the right time, a listening ear that truly hears? What if the story you almost ignored is the one that will show you a new path? What will you do with that opportunity? Many believe that changing the world requires grand acts, but the greatest revolutions begin small, in the everyday, in the validating look, in the silent respect, in the kindness that breaks down walls. Every choice you make shapes the society you live in, and every time you choose to truly see someone, a new story is born. Because deep down, all great transformations start this way, with someone who chooses not to look away, with someone who sees the other as a whole person, even when the world reduces them to a stereotype. And these are the stories that teach us the most, because they reveal not only the other, but also who we are. So next time you pass by someone you might usually ignore, stop, look, listen. Maybe it's the universe offering you a second chance. Maybe it's the beginning of something grand. And maybe, just maybe, it's that story that will change you. If this text touched you, if it made you rethink something, don't keep it to yourself. Because reflection without action is just theory. Like, share, comment. But above all, live differently. Here, every video, every word, every story we tell is a seed planted in the heart of someone ready to bloom. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Because around here we don't deliver empty content. We share transformation, one story at a time.